Hello everyone, welcome to Referees the Final Whistle podcast with Ant, Martin and Nathan, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He's the author of Who Are You 92 Football Clubs, he's a writer on A League of Their Own, Have I Got News For You, 8 out of 10 Cats, all the stuff that you know and love from television. Please welcome to the podcast, the one, the only, Kevin Day.
Hello there.
Happy days.
Yeah, of all, just when you thought lockdown couldn't get any weirder, I'm doing a podcast with 3 referees. So it's not something that I'd have predicted this time last year, but I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to talk to anybody about football at the moment.
Yeah, it's a sign of the times, isn't it? When all the things that happen in podcasts, we have here. I bet you never put that on the list of happening podcasts. One of the things that we sort of communicated a bit on social media was the Colourblindness. That's where you seem quite interested in that, and it's something we're interested in because the FA used to check for colourblindness with match officials. Stopped it. I'm not sure why they were checking, if they were doing it to sort of not allow people with colourblindness in the game or what. But I never seen anything that would help anyone address the problems that people with colourblindness face. So what's your take on that?
Well, do you know, it's a really interesting question because 5 weeks ago, if you'd asked me about colour blindness in football, I would have looked at you with a blank expression, to be honest, because it's not something people that aren't colourblind ever really take seriously. But I do a podcast called Price of Football with Kieran Maguire, who has 2 things wrong with him. One, he's a Brighton fan, and 2, he's colourblind. And he mentioned his colourblindness in passing, and I was kind of intrigued by it because I know that he drives, but not intrigued enough to really sort of think. But then there was a bit of a furore, the Man United-Liverpool game 4 or 5 weeks ago, when several people got in touch with us, basically about the financial aspect of subscribing to Sky and watching a game that they couldn't tell the teams apart, like the old black and white days of glorious memory. And we threw this out in the pod saying, is this an issue? And we were astonished by the amount of people that got in touch with us to say that they were colourblind and simply couldn't tell the two. So we started to do a bit of research. We asked broadcasters. We asked, we didn't get an official reply from the PGMOL, but we were told unofficially that it was the broadcasters' decision. Referees obviously had decisions to make about colour clashes and so on, but it was entirely outside the referee's remit whether the colours clash on TV. But broadcasters, and it turns out we've had this confirmed, broadcasters do have an option to say these kits are identical, until they just never exercise it. So we basically, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, we listened to every person of who was colourblind about the issue, and we've contacted Sky for a further response, and have had nothing back so far. But I think they're waiting to find out for how many people it is an issue before they decide whether or not to do anything about it. But of course it is an issue, because if you subscribe to Sky Sports or BT Sports, it's very expensive, and I think the least you can expect in this day and age is to be able to watch a game without having, when I was a kid growing up, it was Brian Moore explaining to you that Everton are in the slightly lighter socks if you've got a black and white TV. And there's no need for that to happen these days if you're paying up to £100 a month for various football media broadcasting. So the initial response from everybody was that we didn't realise this was a problem, but it is an issue. And again, it transpired that it's an issue for people in the refereeing world as well. So I don't know what happens if a referee is colourblind. I don't know whether you're tested for colourblindness, because, of course, it would make a difference if you're trying to identify a player that's committed an offence, or whether you're showing the right card. So something that to outsiders seemed like almost a laughing matter, we realised it was something quite serious. And yet at the same time, as I sort of tried to acknowledge to Kieran, on the grand scheme of things, it wasn't the most serious. But I've stopped making jokes about it now because I realise it's insensitive. But I'm sure give it a few weeks, we'll be back. But it's an issue. Again, it's amazing how you can be around football for your whole life and it still throws up issues that it didn't occur to you were problems. So
it is one of those things that do pop up, because, like Martin said years ago, and I don't know the timescales of this one, but it was it got flagged up Because I remember a period, and I want to say it was around the early noughties, where referees were given a yellow card, which was a rectangle, and the red card, which was a circle.
Circle, yeah.
So anyone that was colourblind, they could tell the difference between what the referee was holding up, because it was either a square yellow or it was a circular red. Do the BBC still offer a TV license that's just black and white TV license and a colour TV license?
No, they discontinued that some time ago, apparently, because there was obviously a huge discrepancy in the amount. But I think I can't put a date to that, but I understand they discontinued that.
Because it seems like that would be somewhere that that would be the logical place to go, is to have a concessionary, like, if a blind person don't have to pay full whack for the TV license from the BBC, they shouldn't have to pay full whack for a Sky Sports subscription.
Well, I think it's even easier than that when it comes to colourblindness, because all it needs is one of the broadcasters to say to the away team, "Can you wear white shorts?" And I'm sure the marketing department of Liverpool would be very unhappy if, I don't know what colour that away green kit is described as, but I'm sure they'd be unhappy if they had to slightly alter it. But it's very rare that one team plays another team that have got identical colours. So it's easy, or even different coloured socks. It's easy enough to remedy. It's not particularly. I mean, it's one of my big bugbears in football that teams always wear their away kit, whether the colours clash or not. I mean, it's something that really genuinely annoys me, because there's no need for it, basically.
It's just to sell shirts.
Of course it is. It's absolutely to do that. But in this issue, I think if there are, and it seems like there could be as many as 600,000 people that suffer with colour, if there are that many football fans that are unable to sell teams apart, then wear different. That's all it takes. It's not going to affect the enjoyment of the game for the rest of us, and it probably makes life. And again, because there was an issue, I can't remember which game it was recently, it's a Premier League game, where at half time there was an issue because the referee's shirt was
it was a championship. It was
it a championship game? Yeah,
it was on Sky at lunchtime, and I remember it was said, and actually, I follow the particular referee on Instagram, and he put a picture of him in both kits in both halves and said, "Look, I made a mistake. We should have come out in this other colour," and it delayed the start of the game, the restart of the game, I think.
Did it? Okay, it's interesting, because I hadn't particularly noticed, Nathan, until the commentator pointed it out. Because it's like a lot of games, they're on in the background, but I'm not really watching them. But I hadn't really noticed there was this clash until, let's say, interesting that the referee came out and admitted that he'd made a mistake, which is.
I think one of the managers had said to him, "Look, my players are having a bit of difficulty," because I think they were wearing a navy blue. I think it was Coventry. They were wearing a navy blue kit, and they obviously had the black on, and then they changed to purple tops. Right. Try and help them with obviously to manage that, because I think some of them were looking up and seeing the referee and almost nearly passing the ball to him.
So I did a thing years ago when I was doing Match of the Day too. I spent the day with Rob Styles, but I can't remember this detail. So at Premier League or Championship level, how many kits is a ref actually bringing with him? Is he instructed?
Four different colours of shirt and socks.
So what's the default colour then for a referee that they?
Always black.
It's always black still.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I think if you ask most football fans that question, they wouldn't give black as the answer.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I would have thought green. It's like you notice when the referee's wearing black. I always like it. I think it's great.
I think that's probably more of a consequence of television and where we are in modern day.
Yeah, possibly.
It's now become that perception. I think it's really interesting as well to have somebody like yourself who's more of a football fan who actually can give us that, because I think as referees we all would know that it would be black, and then if you can't wear black you then look to what's the next colour. But I think it's really interesting that a lot of fans probably do think that black's not our default colour anymore.
I mean that's entirely anecdotal, obviously, but I would have. That's certainly my reaction, which is I'm pleased to find out that it is black.
Yeah, and actually in the laws of the game, the dreaded laws of the game, it actually says, the default is black, and it below a certain level, everyone has black. But what does happen as well, Kev, is that referees have a preferred colour themselves. There's loads out there, particularly the ones who love a sunbed or two.
I tell you what, though, those neon yellow tops really do bring out a suntan. If you're wearing one and it's the middle of summer, you want to show it off. Yellow kits.
Yeah, some of them say they're making me look thinner. There is genuine people who would who would say, and then you see goalkeepers exactly the same as a referee.
Yeah.
Oh, he doesn't come off with, that he won't come down the other end. And
it's funny you mention that though about the kit, because I'm a Newcastle fan, and I remember on one of the rare sunny days that we do have in the northeast, there was the neon kits. The referees changed them at half time because 2 of the 3 officials on the pitch had been stung by bees during the first half of the game. So they changed at half time because they were attracting too many bees. So they had to change the colour.
With all due respect to 3 referees, this is exactly the sort of conversation that football fans need to hear. Because the more referees are humanised to football fans, the better it is. Because, I didn't know. Football fans need to know that officials are being stung by bees at St James's.
Yeah, they'd love it.
just for the meme purposes alone, just for social media. But this is exactly the sort of thing that I've always argued there should be. I understand why referees don't explain mistakes after games. I fully do, but I've always argued that referees should be more accessible to fans, because fans need to know that referees are fans as well.
Well, this is something that we've chatted about on other episodes of the podcast, is the way that almost, I'm speaking from an English perspective, obviously this podcast goes out around the world, but it feels like the FA are trying to breed in a robot referee, one that doesn't have a personality to manage the players in the way that perhaps your Graham Poll did back in the day, or Rob Stiles, as you mentioned. There's bags of personality in that early era of the Premier League that seems now today to have just been trained out of everyone to keep everyone in line. And because the argument is we want consistency. Well, with personality, you'd get so much inconsistency because the personalities go all over the place.
Well, it's that same argument that I always have when footballers say you want common sense and you want consistency, but the two are mutually exclusive. You can't have common sense and consistency. You either apply the laws of the game the same way every time, or you don't. But now you've mentioned the GP word, I'm not sure whether this is the right place or the wrong place to admit that I'm old friends with Graham Poll. I've known Graham a long time. And I've learned a lot of my attitude to referees. I kind of wish I hadn't met any referees. I've met quite a few. And I kind of wish I hadn't met, especially David Ellery.
You're killing a stereotype here, Kevin. I think you're killing a stereotype, because many people think referees don't have any friends.
Can we take this? Is there any chance we can edit this bit out? I don't want this going all around the world. But I did a podcast years ago. I did a podcast for the Championship manager, and Mark, it was myself, Mark Chapman, Graham Poll, and a guy called Roy from the company. And it was a very successful podcast. And Graham was fascinated because he won't mind me saying, he's got the sense of humour of a 9-year-old boy for a start. in the pub we used to go to afterwards, you could have pints or you could have jugs, and basically the woman who ran the pub used to say, "Would you like jug?" And he would just piss himself laughing every time she said jugs. Well, we had a German journalist on the podcast once called Helmut Koch. And I thought Graham was going to explode. But it's just the most. You're talking to a man who's refereed the best players in the world, and if you like football, how can you not want the insight of somebody who's refereed the best players? And also, you learn 2 things. You learn that referees are as obsessed with football as we are. They're massive football fans. And also, it turned out that 9 times out of 10, to my fury, if there was a controversial refereeing decision we discussed, he was normally right. Who would have thought that? He knew more about the laws of the game than the pub referee here. But it did change my perception of referees a little bit, knowing Graham and getting that in. So he would talk about how to referee Ronaldo, for example. It's like the first time somebody kind of fouled Ronaldo, you'd give him a free kick because that gave you 15 minutes of grace of it. It's like, and different players. It's really interesting to hear this, and I do think it would help if referees, as Martin said, could be humanised a little bit. And if you're saying as well, if referees are being trained to be robots, that's not a good thing on or off the pitch, surely.
Well, I'm with you on this, and my angle on this is a little bit darker, really, Kev. And I said for a long time, one of the reasons I want to start a charity up with no funding from the FA is because the Referee Association get part funded by the FA, the PPMOL, so they're not very vocal on social media criticising them. which sometimes the FA will just ignore emails of complaints. And when you go on social media and the media pick up, lo and behold, we get answers to our emails.
Yeah.
What I've always said, Kev, is I don't know an organisation other than the mafia who make money out of violence against them. And when you get a referee's getting abused or threatened, well, they'll find that player, rightly so.
Yeah.
The referee gets no benevolence. They keep the money. The FA keep the money. And I've always thought, and someone can prove me wrong on this, but no one has so far, Kev. It's not within the FA's interests for a player to get on with a referee. If the referee is creating an income stream for that particular county FA or the FA, it just doesn't make business sense.
Well, that's a cynical point of view, and I talk as somebody who's very cynical about football. But that's very interesting, and I'm surprised to learn that referees don't get that level of support. Because the one thing we all know is, I remember playing Sunday football, and even then you'd think, who would be a referee at that level? And but it's really interesting when you hear it's the mantra of older players, isn't it? Oh, you can't talk to referees these days, and you kind of think you should be able to talk to a referee, but it's. The thing about referees responding, Mark Clattenburg, and I know you had Mark on this pod recently. I was hosting TalkSport a couple of years back when Andy Jacobs wasn't well, so I hosted the afternoon show with Paul Hawksby, and John Moss was a guest. John Moss was on with Mike Riley, and again, I wish I hadn't met them because they're both perfectly charming, nice people. And John smiled when I said, "You hate Palace, didn't you?" And every ref, but every Palace fan listening to this will know that Mark Clattenburg will get mentioned because he's one of those referees that Mark Clattenburg always got it wrong against Palace. We thought it's always one of those things. We can't win today. Clattenburg's a ref, and then 2 years ago he made an interview, and it was really interesting. He was asked a question. Are there any fans that you think really dislike it? He said Palace fans really dislike it. And he said, to be honest, I think I've given them reason to do so. And he talked about one particular incident, which was the FA Cup final 2016, when he admitted, he said, I made a mistake. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. When Connor Wickham was clean through, he was onside, Smalling fouled him. He broke the foul. He was one-on-one with the keeper, and Clattenburg blew and brought it back for the free kick. And my estimation of Mark Clattenburg went up immensely when I read that he'd made a mistake, that he'd acknowledged that Palace fans were right to be annoyed with him. And if he'd said that at the time, if he'd said that 2 hours after the cup final, we'd have still been annoyed, but we would have gone, yeah, of course, he made a mistake. We know he made a mistake. There's not one part of us thought he did that deliberately, but of course you do because you live on it. But I'm quite annoyed about the fact that lack of support, because for most football fans, referees are they're pantomime villains. We know that, and we know, and it's been proved in the pandemic. This idea that football can't exist without fans. Unfortunately, it can. If football had to go on without fans, it would for 5, 10, 15 years. It can't exist without players, and it can't exist without officials. And most football fans know that. They absolutely know that, because otherwise games would be like they were when you were 9 years old and you disallow every goal because it didn't hit the right part of the wall. So we know that you have to have officials, but most football fans, they're pantomime villains. I don't like goal line technology because we still talk about Dermot Gallagher and disallowing a goal about 20 years ago against Leeds in a cup game, and it's 3 foot over the line. Dermot Gallagher said it didn't cross the line. We're still moaning about that now. Right? Goal line technology robs us of that moment. But we all know, all sensible fans know, that referees are just pantomime villains. We know that. But there are an element who think they are evil, who think they are right for abuse. And I can't believe that the FA don't give them more support than they're actually getting, especially from players. That's astonished me. We know that they're professional these days. I'm surprised that they haven't got that level of support.
Yeah, a lot of people are shocked when we say that. When I frame it, everyone I've talked to, journalists and professionals like yourself, would always say, "What?" Well, they always say, "Oh, referee, you've earned your £20 for the FA, and you buy yellow cards and the red cards." And I only got into refereeing because I was banned so many times. I was so violent on the pitch when I moved from Liverpool to Somerset. It didn't equate to me that normal people don't fight at every turn. And I was many times I got sent off, and the missus was saying, "God, we got to pay another 25 quid." And when I look at it now, and you see the income streams that must generate, and we did a bit of a poll on how many courses to do. per game referees, like 1.5. You add all that up and all the money. And then you see when Jose Mourinho gets fined for his 20 grand here, 30 grand there. No one really asks where that goes. No one says, does that get on supporting referees, or does that get on, nice bottles of wine when England play at Wembley? Well, it's this sort of forensicness that I think when people realise that we are lovers of football.
Yeah, of course.
Really, we couldn't play. We got where we did, a lot of us at pro level, because we were actually all right at refereeing, not very good at playing. We love the game any less than anybody else.
I'm gonna raise that issue of where the money goes on price of football, because Kieran will find out, because that's, if you're talking about that level of money going into fines, we need to find out where that money's going.
None of it goes. There's no benevolence at referees. Even the insurance that county FAs offer, like they say, sign up, register. Up until 3 months ago, when I flashed this up, I looked into it. They're not even insured for getting assaulted. If you get beat up, the insurance the county FA offer doesn't cover you for assault, only accidents.
So if a referee, and again, please don't tell people that I'm being serious about referees' concerns here, but if a referee's, one of my local teams is Peckham Town in I can't remember, London Senior League or whatever. So if a referee at that level is subject to abuse or assault, and in one particular game or by one particular player, who do they turn to then for help afterwards when they're upset or annoyed or frustrated? Who do they turn to for help about that anger or annoyance or frustration?
The referees. Well, some of them might be a member of the referee association,
right?
But that's a very small group of people. There's only about 2,000 active referees who are in the referee association, and there's 30,000 referees. The majority have got no one to turn to, which is why we want to start a charity to offer it to everyone free. Like we even go to hearings all over the country and don't charge money to represent them. But we'll turn to the county FA. Like loads of different types of mental health challenges. You're not going to go to the people who promote you to say, I don't feel wrong.
Okay.
You're never going to go to the FA because you want to get your cup finals, you want to get your promotion, you want to get those like local derbies that everyone wants at grassroots level right up to the top. The referees haven't really got anyone to turn to, which is why we feel, we really changed the game and all it's self-promoting here. Because people come to us and say, look, I can tell you stuff and I don't feel it's going to be held against me. Whereas with county FAs, a lot of them feel as if some of them don't support them enough. Not all of them. It'd be unfair to say all of them are poor, but we're seeing an awful lot of them that don't really support referees in the way they should. Really a lot. Honestly,
I'm genuinely surprised to hear that, and also quite alarmed to hear that you say that there's a perception that referees think it's a sign of weakness if they turn to somebody for help and advice, and because I always assumed that referees would be at the very least mentored through every level, and clearly not.
No. Actually, part of the criteria when you take the courses, they'll say you'll be offered a mentor for your first 5 games. Now, at first, I thought that was great. And then I looked at the language and it said offered. Okay. So, we offer everyone. But then the mentors you've got available might say, not available. And when we've looked at it, all the new referees of any age, Kev, people who were starting at 35, got a bad knee in football and decided to referee, they're not getting the mentoring just to think things like dealing with difficult conversations. How do you react when someone calls you a swat? And you're not used to that because you're accountants and you work in an office.
Yeah, of course.
It's all those acclimatizations to football that just isn't addressed in a basic referees course. And that's why we think people like Graham Poll, who's got character, done it, he's got a lot to offer back to people, but because they have fallouts with the FA, whatever, they don't seem to give back. And that's their own opinion, isn't it?
Can I inject a bit of levity into calling the referee a twat here, just because it's a story I was going to tell you anyways. I'm a trustee of the Crystal Palace Foundation, and 2 years ago we started a South London mental health football league, midweek league, for young men, a lot of whom are refugees, but for young men who are suffering from mental health issues. And football, as we know, football's a brilliant way of bringing people from different communities together. And it was great. So there were 6 or 7 teams. There was a Palace team, a Charlton team, a Bromley team. And a mate of mine who suffers from depression was made captain of the Palace mental health team. And I said to him, are you sure this is a good idea? Because you've got a really bad temper. Out with his depression, he had a really bad temper, had a really short fuse. Sounds like you when you moved to Somerset. And sure enough, in the 5 minutes into the first game, this bloke went through him, and the referee didn't give a free kick away, and he went absolutely. He called him all sorts of F's and C's and twats, and the ref just stepped back, gave him a straight red, deservedly. And my mate, thinking on his feet, went, "Oh, sorry, mate, Tourette's. That's my mental health. That's why I play for this team." and the ref went, "Oh, right, fine, okay," and didn't give him a red card. And then, but the trouble is, that my mate then had to swear at the ref for the rest of the game. But I often thought, and it's not funny, really. It's fun, but I often thought it would make the best "you are the ref" question ever. Yeah. If halfway through the second half somebody said to him, "Mate, he hasn't got Tourette's," what does the ref do? Does he then go back and yellow card him for lying, or give him the red card retrospectively? But it's one of those things where you go, I really couldn't be a referee, but the level of that mental thing, I'm struggling to come to terms with that. So even at the highest level, then, when people, it's a criticism people often throw at referees. I'm sorry, I know you're meant to be asking me questions here, but there's a criticism people often throw at referees that they're refereeing for the assessor rather than they're not refereeing the game. Which you kind of think, well, of course they're refereeing to the assessor because he's probably the only one in the ground who knows the laws. That's something else we'll come on to, the way that people in football don't know the laws of the game. But at what level then does that assessment kick in? At what level are you being assessed?
Oh, it's such a great question, Kev. And it's great that it's developed this way. You're asking those questions too, because you can tick a box when you're registered as a referee at lower level and say, "I don't want to be considered for promotion." So there might be those guys who are coming back from injury, you want to give some of the back to the game, who are vital to the refereeing. And they will never get assessed. Never get assessed. They just tick a box and never ever. And we've always said, there should be some way of every referee gets looked at every year to make sure that they're up to speed and modern practices and stuff like that. But right up until conference, I always call it for conference, National League Premier. Below them, you don't get refereed every game. Above them, so like from the National League Premier and above, you will get assessed every game, observed. So what you find is, when I worked at the FA, I kept an eye on how many referees and what the cautions compared to when an assessor is there to when an assessor isn't. And you are many, many, many times more likely to pick up a yellow card when an assessor's there than when there isn't. And what and the FA, Barry of the FA denied it, but I've got the evidence, you can challenge me on it. And I know for a fact, and people blame the assessor. They say, "Oh, it's your fault." But it's not, it's the referee's fault. The referee should act the same whether an assessor's there or not. That creates consistency. Then the problem then, Kev, is club marks. Referees, because club marks are a part of the promotion, when the assessor isn't there, they think, "Oh, if I don't book him, if I need bollock him for calling me a twat, they'll give me a better club mark." You've got to hold it together and say, "Well, actually, no, that's shit. We want to know what a yellow card is there, whether there's an assessor there or not." It's that level of consistency where when there's no assessor there, referees under-referee, and when there is an assessor there, the over-referee. Right. This gap becomes bigger, and no one's happy with it. So you're right, people do pander to it. But as you climb the ladders, that argument isn't there because there's an assessor every single game from the National League Premier and above. So it shouldn't be a problem. So there's almost two worlds in that front, Kev, to be honest.
That's really interesting.
If I can just take it back, I think, to what you were saying before. I mean, a lot of the work that I do is around mental health, resilience and mental well-being, particularly with match officials. And I just want to say at this point as well, obviously you talk about being a trustee of the Crystal Palace Foundation. My business, the Third Team, is a Be a Game Changer business champion, which is Newcastle United Foundation's men's mental health.
Brilliant.
Sort of thing. And I always say that wherever you are around the country, if you can get involved with your local foundation, there's always going to be provision for mental health within that. And so I'm greatly supportive of all the foundations of all the football clubs because I think they provide vital resources. But one of the things I've really noticed is the fact that when I deliver workshops to county level officials across the country, I'm right down to Cornwall, up to Northumberland and Cumbria and Kent and places like that, I always get probably 4 or 5 individual referees who'll come to me and talk to me specifically about challenges they face. And I feel really that the honest reason for that is because I think a lot of them don't trust their referee development officer or referee development manager with that, knowing that is the person who, not solely, but will form a big part of who's going to appoint county cup games, who's going to decide promotions, and all sorts of things like that. And I think it's quite telling. I mean, look, I love what I do and I love being able to support them, and I'm deeply passionate about mental health and well-being and helping referees to handle a lot of the challenges, particularly when we talk about dissent from club officials and players. But I have to say, I really do feel that, just leading on from what Martin said there in particular about not wanting certain people to know because it might prejudice things. I think it is a real issue and a real challenge within the game.
Well, also, it's something as those of us outside the refereeing world wouldn't. It's the opposite of what I was expecting you to tell me, to be perfectly honest. So I'm slightly taken aback about that. And I mean, the dissent thing is really interesting because fans are never. I try not, because I'm a middle-aged man now, so it's not a good look with me shouting at people on the pitch anyway. And I'm a nervous watcher anyway. But there are occasions when you do. There's no option other than to say, "How was that a penalty?" Blah, blah, blah. You wouldn't dream of saying it to his face. Yeah. But it's really interesting from the players' point of view. It's a debate we have on the Palace podcast we do. It's like we've got a Palace team now that, to us, seem particularly quiet. Whereas we had players before like Mile Jednak and Damien Delaney, who, if they saw an injustice on the pitch, if they saw Wilf getting fouled, for example, because again, don't start me on Wilf Sahar and refereeing, but if they saw an injustice, they'd be in the referee's face all the time. And there are some fans that actively encourage that, whereas we've got a team now that is particularly quiet, and you notice it even more when there are no fans in the ground. We've got a team that don't get in the referee's face, and I think it's really interesting that even now we have that debate about whether or not players should be showing dissent, because of course they shouldn't. Full stop, they shouldn't be showing dissent. Having said that, one of the reasons I don't like rugby is I can't stand that arms behind the back, yes sir, no sir, public school stuff. I think players should be able to say, they should be able to query decisions, but not in a visibly...
A middle ground.
Absolutely, but I think it's really interesting that fans think, even more so since referees are professional, and fans think they're getting a lot of money. If they can't stand there and be shouted at, then maybe they're in the wrong job. But of course, if you then said, well, if you go in the pub afterwards and it takes you 5 minutes to get served, you're not standing there shouting, "Where's my drink, you cheat?" And they kind of go, "Oh yeah, but the bloke behind the bar is only getting 10 quid an hour or whatever."
Well, I think Kevin, it's still that they're earning, but they're still earning a fraction of the players. And what the fans are not doing, and not that I would encourage this at all, is absolutely lambasting their players for missing a penalty, for example. Last week we had, obviously, West Bromwich Albion against Brighton. Which I'm sure you enjoyed.
I've enjoyed it. Lee Mason's my new hero.
Yeah. But the thing is, obviously, Lee was lambasted terribly in a game in which he actually pushed himself through with a calf injury, because after the incident that had happened in the first half, he probably felt he couldn't come off. Yeah, which is a sad state of affairs in itself. And I think that you then look at the situation that Brighton had, where Lewis Dunk's coming out, really being helped by, I think it was Jeff Shreves from Sky, being helped to criticise the referees, almost asking leading questions that encourage him to lambast the referee. And yet maybe 10 seconds, 12 seconds, 15 seconds max is about the two penalties that they missed and the open goal that they missed from 6 yards as well.
Well, I think you make a really good point there, because Sky, without a doubt, didn't cover themselves in glory. If Palace are not playing on a Saturday afternoon, I like watching the scores come in. I find that relaxing, and I'd rather do that than watch a game. But Jeff Stelling, who I admire as a broadcaster, was, I thought, out of order. And for 3 separate times he came back to it. Even in the second half, he came back to it and said, show us that again. Show us. Because Paul Merson was kind of amused, as we all were. But there was no attempt to unpack what had happened or potentially discover what Lee Mason could. It was just like, it's much better TV that a referee's made a mistake.
But do you notice something, Kev? Do you notice that Sky Sports don't have a referee pundit, so to speak, BT and Amazon do?
I think that's really interesting, because that wouldn't have shut down the conversation. But if they could have gone to a referee and said, "Well, what's happened there?" And this whole confusion about, well, had the ball crossed the line before he blew his whistle? And it's like, I'm kind of half thinking, I think I know that law. I think I've heard it. But all it needed was a referee. And it would have been very easy for them to phone up a referee or get a referee on. But instead, the narrative for them was much better that they carry on with Jeff Selling being. And as you say, Palace fans don't like Lewis Dunk. Long story. We don't like Brighton, full stop. But as you say, he was given space and time to basically grass the referee up in a sense. And then they kept showing the goal that Brighton scored against Liverpool, where the ref had let him take the free kick quickly. And then, but again, Scott, it comes back to something I mentioned before. I think Chris Kamara, I think, is one of the loveliest blokes you can meet, and he's a brilliant broadcaster. He doesn't know the laws of the game. He doesn't understand offside. He doesn't get it. And he's never challenged when he goes, oh, he wasn't offside because of this, and you go, well, he was, but they don't come back to him afterwards and say, actually, Chris, you got that wrong. When Fulham had the goal disallowed against Tottenham, the one that hit, terrible decision, but the right decision. It's an absolutely shocking decision. There's nobody in football who thinks the game is better because that goal was disallowed.
Which is why they've changed it for next.
Which is why, again, but that's another issue. I don't like laws being changed. But again, on Sky, there's no one saying, well, actually, hang on, the ref had no choice. That's the law. Scott Parker, to his enormous credit, when he's being challenged afterwards, going, you must be furious. He went, no, because it's a stupid law, but it's not. I'm not going to blame the referee for that. But that didn't stop the rest of Sky from blaming the referee for that decision when it's clearly not his decision. He made the right decision. It's just it was so that that really annoyed me that Sky. And it's interesting that on the highlights on the BBC, of course they showed it on Match of the Day. They had no choice but to show it, but it was far less of an issue. It was just the referee made a mistake. I wonder why he made that mistake. That must have been frustrating for the players. Move on.
Yeah, but even the broadcasters that do have these referees on, the fallout from having a referee on to explain things on social media is the majority of the fans that then talk about it go, oh, well, it's pointless listening to that referee anyway. Of course they're going to close ranks. Of course they're going to defend the referee's decision. But what it actually is the players don't want to have that decision explained. They want someone to explain the laws of the game for them because they can't be bothered going and reading them for themselves.
Yeah, and why should play? It's astonishing how the reason pundits don't know the laws of the game is because they're ex-players. Mm-hmm. And why would they ever need to know the laws of the game? You know, some of the more you talk to Gary Lineker, he will tell you the offside law completely because he lived by it. He knows how to get offside decisions. But and the fact is, the problem for referees, of course, is that people like me. I referee the odd comedian's charity match, so I think I'm a fully qualified pub ref. It's as simple as that. Every football fan thinks they know the laws of the game, and when you go back to a pub after a game when there's been a particularly bad decision, and you watch it, and one of your mates will go, "Well, actually, that probably shouldn't have been a goal," and everyone goes, "Shut up! What's the matter with you?" Of course, it should have been a goal. And then one of your mates will go, "Well, if it had been the other way round, you'd have wanted it to be disallowed." And you go, "Yeah, of course, because it wouldn't have been a goal if the other team scored it." It's like Wilf. It's the whole debate about does Wilf Zaha dive? As far as I'm concerned, no Palace player ever in the history of football has ever dived ever. Of course, they might. Andy Johnson might have occasionally maximised a falling potential. He may have taken. Andy Johnson had a very low sense of gravity, so occasionally, of course, he's going to go down. But I don't think Palace, and it's
a crazy thing because, like you say, people think that they could do as good a job as the referee they see on the telly. It's the equivalent of going, see that Michelin star chef? I can cook just as good as him. I knocked together some beans and toast this morning. You know what I mean? That's the sort of equivalence that we've got going on.
But it's almost the same. But the thing is that when it comes to sport, we do think we can do, and it's like we watched Christian Benteke. I mean, God love him, he scored last night, and bless him, he always scores in a losing cause for the most part. Although he's bought himself 2 years after that.
Yeah, I was going to say he must be flavour of the month right now.
Oh, well, although the best bit of that was Roy Hodgson implying that the game plan was to hang on for 96 minutes and score with 15 seconds of the game to go. It's like, yeah, Roy, we don't quite believe that. But when a player misses a chance, we all go, I would have scored that, and it's like, no, you wouldn't. You'd have been doubled up, breathless on the halfway line. It's just where you've been. But we all think we can. We all think we know the law, and that's the trouble. Is that's underlined a lot by the fact that most of the pundits don't know the the laws of the game either. And then, of course, you get players debating this whole thing that should you go down for a penalty? The players, Ian Wright will say, well, you've got to go down in the box, otherwise the referee doesn't know you've been fouled. Gary Lineker will say, if a goalkeeper feels, if you feel a touch from the keeper, you go down. So players blur the line between cheating and not cheating all the time.
Which makes the referee's job all the more difficult.
Of course it does. Of course it does. I'd be interested to know where you stand on that, because it's as a non-footballer and non-referee, that this idea that a player can be too honest. Oh, he's too honest, he should have gone down there. You think surely at the highest level the referee knows there's been a touch.
If I'm not mistaken, and I have to be honest, I was only half watching it, but in Crystal Palace last night, wasn't Gary Cahill not booked for a tackle on the edge of the box where the player had dived, dare I say?
Of course, everybody who plays against Palace dives. We know that. It's taken us again, but then again, that's a problem because there is that.
But what I'm saying is the movement, and forgive me, was it Stuart Atwell that was refereeing the game last night? I think from Stuart's position, the Tottenham player has made such an action that he's actually being deceived, and he's an honest guy who's looking to detect foul challenges across the pitch as he's moving, and he's seen a movement that looks like, because players have. I don't think they would be working on it in training, but for sure they know what muscle movements and all sorts of things to make to replicate contact and things like that. And I think he got that wrong. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, he's got that wrong when I saw the reverse angle replay. But then I thought, but actually, I think it was Lucas Moura. I'm thinking, but Moura's actually made the movement that he would if he had been tackled. And now Cahill's booked and they've got a free kick in a dangerous position.
Yeah.
I think it's a problem that's evolved without us even knowing how much of a bigger problem it is. And when people say diving, they just think, oh, he's gone down in the box for a penalty. Yeah. But it's almost all over the pitch. And I went on record when Mike Dean got those death threats.
Yeah.
Those death threats were purely from the results of a man pretending to be hurt in the face.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is none of the players come out and have a go at each other, and I think we all own this problem. I think referees own the problem to try and get a better angle on it, but I think players need to own a problem because when they're a victim of getting conned by simulation, they're absolutely up in arms. But when they gain from it, no one says a word. I think football needs to own that problem, I think, Kes.
The problem is there, Mark, as well, that footballers won't come out and condemn it publicly because they condone it privately.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because I've spoken to a lot of players who will say, I've said it to Gary Lineker a lot, because I'm fascinated by it. I love talking to people inside the game. So I say, if you go down and you think there's 50-50 contact, does a player say to you, come on, Gary, you're better than that? You'll go, no. The player will say to me, thanks, we won the game. Mm. Players are not worried about whether they've conned like you say, they're worried if they get conned. But the players worry, if you don't shake their hand, they're furious at the end of the game. If you spit, they're furious. But for the most part, they're not fussed about what we call cheating and diving because they've got trophies to win. They've got points to win. They've got bonuses to get. They take a far more practical approach to this than we do. And if the odd referee gets taken for a ride, so be it, is their view, I think. And so they're never, managers will never publicly condemn one of their players, and I don't think they'll privately do it. We all know, Paolo Di Canio is legendary act of sportsmanship against Everton, I think it was.
Yeah, he caught the ball. Yeah.
But Harry Redknapp recently, for the first time, has admitted that he absolutely tore strips off him afterwards, totally bollocked him. He said, score the goal and then help him up. Yeah. So it's like we expect these standards of behaviour from footballers that we shouldn't expect, really, and that's the other problem for referees as well.
Yeah.
Well, it's double standards, absolute double standards. That referees are expected to be perfect, and everything they see, do, every action they take has to be 100% correct. But the players can miss open goals, they can dive, they can cheat.
Of course.
And the thing is, referees should be judged on the same level that the players are judged. So a player will miss an open goal, a referee will get conned and give a penalty for a player that's dived. There should be the same acceptance of the players won a penalty and they're up high-fiving each other because they're potentially going to score a goal now. But all of obviously the fans on the other side, instead of having a go at the player going, you're a twat, you shouldn't be diving, you're ruining the game, it's the referee that's ruining the game for not being able to see these micro contacts.
Well, I think the good part of that is I do genuinely think that 90% of fans, once they've calmed down, realise that. 90% of fans realise that, yes, occasionally a referee will make a mistake. That's the first step towards acceptance, is realising that the referees aren't deliberately. It's like John Moss said, like, you think every football fan I talk to thinks I hate their team the most. All right? And he said, probably if you analyse games that I've refereed, I will have made mistakes against, as it happened, John Moss gave a penalty against us for Man City that we missed on New Year's Day. And it probably shouldn't have been a penalty. So that sort of took the rug from under my feet a little bit. But the thing is, as soon as you think the referee's made a mistake, it's not deliberate, that's fine. And that's when you get this idea that let's move on from that. Because and there are still people who go, the referee, people forget that referees have gone through 20 odd years of training to become a professional referee. They've not just been picked off the street corner. These people are good at what they do. You don't get to referee a Premier League game or officiate a Premier League game without being considered a proper top class, the best at your decision. So, anybody who was making decisions deliberately, they would have been weeded out, I presume. And Graham Poll's. I don't like telling this story because Graham Poll wins in it, basically. Because I was talking to Graham once and I said, look, be honest, if you're refereeing at Old Trafford, this was back in the Fergie days, I said, if you're refereeing at Old Trafford and United are playing Palace and there's a free kick on the halfway line, 50-50, I said, subconsciously, go on, you give it to United. And he went, I don't know what my subconscious tells me to do. That's the whole point of the subconscious. So I went, all right, fair enough, you've got a point there. Yeah. He did go on to elaborate that if you're at Old Trafford in front of 70,000 people and you can see Fergie's angry red screaming face and it's 0-0 in a meaningless end of season game, he said, yeah, occasionally it might have to be 51%, 49% for me to give a foul to Palace. Occasionally, he said, just because I'm the one who gets bollocked by Fergie at the end of it. He said, but I'm not deliberately not giving a foul against Palace. It's just like I might give Man United the benefit of the doubt. And it's like, brilliant. I'm really pleased that you say that because that means you shouldn't be. He said, but otherwise, I'm refereeing the game to the best of my ability. And if I make a mistake, I'll make a mistake. But there's no way on God's earth any referees deliberately going, actually, that player called me a twat 2 years ago. I'm not giving that free kick or I'm giving that penalty. It just doesn't happen. And once a football fan realises that, it makes football a lot easier because it means you can park the referee and just go, fine, okay, we'll and we do love talking about mistakes. Like I say, we still go on about Dermot Gallagher's mistake now because that's part of the game. We love to feel that we've been robbed by an outside force and not beaten by a better team. But most of us realise, that's why I used the phrase pantomime villain at the start, because for most of us, and I think most referees, yourselves included, would probably accept that there's an element of the pantomime villain in your life.
Yeah, there's things that we've heard a million times before said about referees.
Well, of course, what you see, the other one that really annoys me on many levels is Neil Warnock. Right? Because Neil Warnock's a qualified referee. Of all the people who shouldn't publicly, and again, how much does Sky the game Middlesbrough, were they away at Cardiff? No, Swansea. Away at Swansea on Saturday when a bit of controversy, penalty in the 96th minute, goal disallowed for the and of all people, Neil Warnock should know better. But of course, Sky are all over it because Sky, they just leave the cameras running. So they're doing the scores underneath because they know that he's going to be confronting the referee.
But I just think, Kevin, that basically it's one of them. When my dad was 18, okay, he was a forklift truck driver for a summer. Now, he's not going to go into Amazon's warehouse and say, you're not driving a forklift truck properly because he's been an IT professional for the last 30 years. And it's the same thing with Neil, He might have took the referee's course in the 70s or 80s. But,
okay.
And I just think that that's the reality of it, And I think that I just think that unfortunately we're in a position now where, like I said before, I feel that they've boxed a bit clever there in terms of the correspondent who's interviewing him. They know that they can ask leading questions that are going to evoke a reaction because Neil Warnock's fair game for that. And I think that's what they've...
Don't forget, it's not Sky's job to present football in the best light possible. It's Sky's job to get as many eyeballs on their media as possible for ad revenue. So if they've got a viral clip of Neil Warnock slagging referees, everyone hates referees, more people will watch it when it gets uploaded to Facebook and Twitter and get more engagement from the comments of everyone. But I think you nailed it when you said that when everyone's calmed down, 90% of the people after the game will be like, okay, fine, he's human, referee's made a mistake, player missed a goal, defender conceded penalty, all that sort of stuff, and it's kind of accepted. It's the very vocal 10% that have this platform on social media, and they just gather pace, and an incident will happen. And I've done it myself. I've ended up sinking 3 or 4 hours debating people. And as I mentioned before, it's not closing ranks. It's, as a referee, I've seen why that official has given it, because from practical experience, I've been there myself, and I'll have given something similar or not given it, because there's arguments both ways. So no one's ever saying the referee's got it spot on, everyone else needs to shut up. What the ref is saying, it kind of backing up the referee that's kind of given a decision on the field, is I understand why that's being given. Here is why. So
see, I don't see why you shouldn't close ranks. Really, because I close ranks with other Palace fans. If there's something controversial that a Palace player does or Palace management does, if I'm asked to go on talks, I will defend the indefensible as far as I'm concerned. I'll criticise Palace on a Palace podcast or in the pub with my mates, but I won't do it publicly. I won't hear a word said against Palace. As simple as that. So I wouldn't blame referees for saying, in private, when I'm not here, I wouldn't blame you for going, "Mark, Jesus, Lee Mason, what was he doing?" But of course, when I'm here, you explain why Lee Mason made that decision or Stuart Atwell made it, and rightly so. So you should, because if you can't defend each other, I mean, it's one of the things I remember Rob Stiles saying, and they gave me brilliant access to Rob Stiles and his team of officials, and it was a game at Sellers Park, funny enough, so it would have been 2005, 2006. And it was one of the things that I was astonished by how much he was the king of his little domain. Like, basically, if he told the assistant referees to jump, and they were bringing him tea and coffee. But there was one bit at the end, like 5 minutes after the final whistle, and he stayed on the pitch to talk to me, and he said, "Look, I can't stop long. I've got to go and get my story straight with the assistants before the assessor," which I thought was, and I didn't bother me a bit. And because I told mates this, and they went, "Oh, it's disgusting." I went, "No, of course you're not. A, he was being funny, but B, of course you back each other up. I wouldn't expect anything other than you back each other up." Yeah, and so you should, because
we are a team, aren't we? We are a team. We are the third team.
Well, that's it. When the thing is, I wasn't even half joking. It's like it's annoying as a fan to have to acknowledge that the game can continue without fans, but it can't continue without you. And the fact is, this is why Neil Warnock annoys me, because there is a responsibility because you say to people, where do you think, because there's been quite a few new referees this season, and it's like, it's bad enough policemen looking younger, but when police referees start looking 12, that's when you start getting really upset. But there's been a few new refs this season. And of course they're inexperienced, but A, you say to mates, well, where are they going to get their experience from? They've got to build, and then B, you go, where do you think these referees come from? And the more, every time Neil Warnock is visibly shouting at a ref on telly, that's one more referee who doesn't take refereeing up, as far as I'm concerned. Because where do we think referees come from? Because that's like I say, why would a 12-year-old boy or girl want to be a referee when they might think, in 20, 25 years' time, I could be a professional match official and get a certain amount of money plus bonuses. I didn't realise the referees got bonuses until recently. That annoyed me initially. But why would a 12-year-old kid want to be a referee when they I imagine they're going through 10 years of absolute nightmare. And we discover that they're going through this alone without any mentoring. It's just astonishing.
Well, I just think it's the same as you were saying there. You talk about the bonuses, you talk about what John Moss said to you. I think that it's the same with any job. If you work in Greg's, you're not going to deliberately make a bad steak bake, are you? I just think that you're not going to deliberately go out and try and get your decisions wrong. But just going back to what I think Ant was saying about the social media clips, I saw one at the end of Match of the Day on Saturday where they all screamed and rolled around. I don't know if you saw that. They all screamed and rolled around in the chairs at the end of the show, and it was in reference to something that Lacazette had done at Burnley, one of the games where he sort of screamed as loud as he could. And I actually watched that game live, and when I saw that, I thought, he's got an injury there, really bad injury. And what I realised as he basically got up and ran away as soon as the player had been booked was that he was actually trying to get maybe even a red card because he knew that VAR would look at it and see the contact. And if he could scream at the top of his lungs, which, again, Gary Lineker and I think it was Ian Wright and someone else did on Saturday, that you can see them mocking that, but it's not really that funny, is it? Because again, somebody's attempted to deceive that referee on the Mariner on the day.
Well, it's not that funny, and also, I saw a lot of Ian Wright. It's like it's this when they behave like that, it's this implication that they were absolute saints on the football pitch, that they never tried to get anybody booked or sent off, that they never pretended they were hurt, that they never stuck the boot into somebody else, that they never, it's that, and it's always the same with every generation. I'm sure older referees moan about younger referees. It's always the same. But
yes, they do.
Kevin. Of course they do. But I think Gary and Wright, they would have thought that was. I think it was Dion Dublin was the other one, as I recall.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Who's a man who's obsessed by stairs on Homes Under the Hammer. He still can't work out why. The first thing he ever says about a house is it's got stairs.
But
they would presume they lead somewhere, Dion. So I'm not that interested in your opinion on football, to be perfectly honest. But it's again, that's a generation who not both, but they openly talk about how much they hurt each other. They openly talk about what they did to each other, and yet, if a player doesn't shake another player's hand, they're outraged and disgusted. And again, you kind of think they're always going, well, you could talk to referees in those days. And when you talk to them privately, that's not true. What they mean is you could talk to Roger Milford. That's what they always say. Oh, yeah, you could talk to Roger Milford. And then they do a bizarre West Country accent because that's how Roger Milford spoke. But of course, when you read about football and you read about some referees you could talk to and some you couldn't.
Well, they say you could talk to them, but look, from that era of football that we're talking about, the last time anyone was mic'd up in a Premier League game was that famous Arsenal one where they just tore David Ellery apart. If that's what they think talking to the referee is, they can keep it. Because when I do a pre-match, before we toss the coin to decide who gets what, I have a very casual conversation like we're having now. And I said, if you want to talk to me during the game, do it like we're doing now. This is talking to each other, and I'm happy to have a conversation like this. Talking to me isn't screaming obscenities at me from 10 and 15 yards away. So that's that perception of, I can't talk to this ref. He's just telling me to go away. Well, yeah, I'm going to tell you to go away if that's what you think a conversation is.
Well, also, if they say, Roger Milford would tell me to F off or whatever. It's like, well, a referee can't do that now. We saw what happened in the game against Ipswich when a referee squared up to a player, and it's like immediately, even though the player himself said afterwards, didn't bother me for a second, we both shook hands. It's like, oh my God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. The referee has taken exception, and a young man, spittle-flecked young man shouting in his face and squaring up, and it's like, so if a referee does do that, behave like a human being, it's the referee that gets sanctions. So referees are between a rock and a hard place. And again, as we come back before, it's so difficult for the referee because you can't referee with common sense now because you have to referee to the assessor and you have to referee to the law. So if one referee decides one way, actually, he probably did catch him from behind, but I'm not going to show a red, then a player might go, well, that's common sense. But the assessor and the law say, no, he's wrong. He's given, so he can't. So he's stuck, basically. And also, it's very hard to do any job if you've got 15 blokes shouting at you. I mean, I know that as a stand-up comedian. It only takes one bloke shouting at you, and I've got more tools in my armoury than a referee's got to deal with.
Well, you can deal with hecklers by giving it back. The ref's just got to take it.
The ref's just got to take it, and it's shocking. I think it's interesting. Was it Andy Durst? There was two incidents. The David Ellery incident. And I've met David Ellery, a pompous public, a man who thinks that football. The last time Old Carthusians won the FA Cup for him was when football was proper. A man who implied he knew more about the game than I did. But that incident, I think was it Andy Durso at United who got. Was it Andy Durso who got cornered by the United players?
They all got on him, yeah.
Yeah, when he was walking back, there was like for 6 months after each incident, football kind of went, actually, we have to have a look at ourselves here. And then after that 6 months period was over, football went back to how it was. And I think because of the amount of cameras on the games, players from a PR point of view now know that it's not a good look. So you don't see players en masse screaming at referees. They do, but you don't have to be a lip reader to see what they're saying to every decision. Yeah. Every decision that goes against them, throwing her otherwise is fuck off or it's just so it's difficult to do the job in those circumstances, really. And again, like I say, but there are still Palace fans who complain that Palace players don't do that enough because they think that might give us a 0.1% edge, that somehow the referee might go, oh, they shout a lot, I might give them that 50-50 free kick. Whereas my view is always, well, I'll tell you what, I'll try not shouting at him, and then he might give us the 50-50 free kick.